We are approaching close to 8,000 lawyers and staff critical to the DOJ either resigning or being pushed out. We've been covering this mass exodus, this internal implosion at the DOJ, which I think was manifest during, I don't even know what you would call Attorney General Pam Bondi's hearing before the House Judiciary Committee. Say what you want about Merrick Garland. When he showed up before the House Judiciary Committee, he came prepared. He answered the questions. He exercised decorum. He wasn't behaving like a, awful third grader. No offense to awful third graders. But this behavior by the DOJ that federal courts have been consistently not just frustrated, but have viewed as outright sanctionable conduct in cases across the country. We saw it all comes from the top, and then beyond that, it comes from the top of Donald Trump, who gives Pam Bondi her instructions. I mean, she brought with her a middle school style burn book. No offense to middle school students who use burn books. And she just started giving these ad hominem attacks at the members of Congress who were just asking her pretty basic questions about, why haven't you done this? Or can you inform us of who the co-conspirators are? Or what documents are being withheld? And I don't even want to play her clips, right? But she would be saying, well, actually, you live in Culver City. Do you know what it's like to live in Culver City? Pam Bondi probably lives in the equivalent of a Culver City. And she would bring out these weird and bizarre attacks on these various members of Congress. But federal judges, whether they were Trump appointed, Reagan appointed, Obama appointed, George W. Bush appointed, George H.W. Bush appointed, Clinton or Biden appointed, federal judges, not in a political way, have been very critical of Trump's DOJ, but in just a competence way. Why aren't you filing your documents on time? Why are you missing the court's deadlines? Why are you not following the rules of evidence? Why are you not showing up at court hearings? Why are your witnesses claiming that they don't know what the case is about when they submitted declarations claiming that they knew enough to testify? And now when I call them to testify, they don't even know what's stated in their declarations. Now, we've, of course, been covering what DOJ lawyers have been saying in response, and they say we're overworked, we don't have the staff, we haven't been trained. Last week, we covered how the DOJ now has to rely on JAG military lawyers because there's no AUSAs who can handle the caseload. We talked about the story of a immigration lawyer within the Trump regime who was transferred to be an AUSA without knowing what to do. And she said, "Judge, lock me up and throw away the key. Find me in contempt because I need rest. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not trained. I'm doing my best. But there's such disorganization, Judge, that we have people in prisons in huge numbers who courts have ordered released, and the habeas petitions can't even be processed by our office. So notwithstanding the fact that people are being unlawfully detained in prisons, in detention centers that resemble concentration camps, with little children sending letters that ProPublica wrote about saying, I think the water's making me sick. We don't have food, and when we get it, it makes me even sicker. I remember seeing some of those drawings and some of those writings, and hat tip to ProPublica for the great work that they're doing. There's not lawyers to process the paperwork to release people who have been ordered to be released. I want to bring in Harry Littman from the Talking Feds YouTube channel, Talking Feds podcast, Talking Feds Substack. Now, Harry, you were a top lawyer within the Department of Justice. You were also the top federal prosecutor for the Western District of Pennsylvania. You ran that office, so you know what the DOJ's tradition is. And so when you hear the number could be as high as 8,000. I recall the question of Congressmember Neguse cross-examining Bondi. What's going on with the crypto department? How many lawyers are there? Congress member, I cannot answer your question, but I will tell you, have you seen this individual? He was arrested and he lives in Colorado. And then Congress member Neguse, who's a lawyer, says, you're not answering it because you've demolished the crypto division and it no longer exists. So people can commit all these crypto crimes with zero accountability. And we saw that. And Harry, it was beyond cringe. It was, what the hell is that? And you see why. Who would want to work with that person? It is a hostile, horrible work environment, not from a political perspective, but what the hell was that?
You've thrown more than a little bit at me, man. But the thing is, it's all true, and B, all connected. So I agree with you. And let's start with Bondi. How even to put it? She's a very unfortunate combination of taking offense very easily and giving offense very easily. She is nasty. She is crass. She is completely non-responsive. And as best you can tell, she is substanceless. Now, I've testified. I've prepared people for testimony. A time will come when you get a hard question. Anyone with any sort of just knowledge or poise or class knows to be somewhat circumspect. I'll get back to you, Senator, etc. She really seems like not just the third grade student, but the third grade student who actually can't keep up with the third grade curriculum, because every time a long division problem comes up, she screams at the math teacher and breaks the chalk against the blackboard. She is a disaster. Now, that also does bleed into everything you're talking about. Let's go to these thousands of judges who have now completely become unabashed. This is for a DOJ alum, and thank you for including my experience both at Maine Justice and in the field, would be absolutely mortifying if it happened to a single person. 8,000 people, it's just more than that. It's institutional. And again, what's going on, you have judges, first saying, I'm not sure we can trust you anymore, little by little creeping up, and from slightly biting into to now completely eroding and just raising what had been such an important resource for the department, but also for public safety, the sense that the department speaks with integrity, capability, trustworthiness, judges can depend on them. That is now out the window and fallen 100 flights and exploded, and it's not clear if it can ever come back. And the point you made about the former, of course, employee who was dragooned into standing up there and said, just please put me in jail for 24 hours. The thing there is there's a certain kind of, comedy, tragic comedy, feel to it. But if you read what precedes that, the colloquy with the judge, what you find out is you have a whole client, you could call them, who just doesn't give a crap about the courts or any kinds of orders. This is ICE. These are the very people who the chief judge in Minneapolis said last month, you have violated more orders in January than most agencies have done in their entire lifetime. So what she was really saying, yeah, she got fired for it and, it was colorful, but what she really saying is, I can't work with these guys. You try to get answers, they won't give it. Besides, by the way, that there's no resources, no lawyers really in the District of Minnesota. But that's another problem that comes from the top from Bondi, both the hollowing out and Todd Blanche. The hollowing out of the department, the inability to find good people to replace them, but that ICE, for all the supposed outrage that it generates around the country in seeing these revolting videos and the like, they know basically the president and therefore Bondi and therefore Blanche have their back. Yeah, she talked now in Congress about looking into at least the second murder, which of course normally would have meant something like a credible investigation. Who knows what it means now? But the shots, there's a very strong sense here. Ben, I don't have the memos, but you have the Stephen Millers and Hegseths and Trumps of the world basically saying, don't worry about these crazy libs, fellas. You go in and break all the bones you need to, and we'll stand behind you.
The case involves Trump's legal team doing what Trump's legal teams have been doing across case after case after case, which is treating court orders and court deadlines and court processes as things that apply to other people, but not to them. And this particular judge had been watching that pattern play out in his courtroom for months and had issued warnings and had seen those warnings completely ignored and had reached the point where the only thing left to try was making the consequences so immediate and so personal that the lawyers sitting across from him would finally have to reckon with the fact that the rules apply to them too. And I think that is the right call. Because honestly, what else is a judge supposed to do when the people in front of them keep acting like the authority of the court is optional? What actually triggered the jail threat is important to understand, because this was not the judge overreacting to a minor procedural issue, but was a response to Trump's legal team being caught hiding documents that the court had ordered them to produce, and then lying about it under oath. And I want to be clear about what that means, because it is easy for these things to get lost in legal language. They were ordered to hand over documents. They did not hand them over. They were asked directly whether those documents existed, and they said no. And then when the truth came out under sustained questioning from the bench, they had to admit that yes, the documents existed, yes, they knew about them, and yes, they made a deliberate choice to hide them and lie to the court about it. And in my view, that is about as serious as it gets in a legal proceeding, because you cannot have a functioning court system if the lawyers appearing before the court are allowed to lie about whether evidence exists without facing real consequences for doing it. The personal stakes for the lawyers themselves are something I think deserves more attention than it usually gets, because when people talk about Trump's legal troubles, the focus is almost always on Trump himself and what might happen to him. But the lawyers who have been carrying out this strategy of delay and obstruction and misrepresentation are putting their own careers and their own freedom on the line every time they do it. And a federal contempt charge is not a small thing for a lawyer, because it can mean not just the immediate prospect of sitting in a cell, but the longer-term prospect of losing your law license and never being able to practice law again. And some of these lawyers have spent decades building careers that can be destroyed by a single federal judge finding that they lied to the court. And I honestly think more of them need to reckon with that reality instead of just doing whatever the client wants and hoping the consequences land on someone else. Trump's reaction was completely predictable. And I say that not to be dismissive, but because at this point, the pattern is so established that you could write the response before it happens, attack the judge personally, call the whole thing a witch hunt, promise aggressive appeals, post something on social media about how the system is rigged. And the problem with that response, beyond the obvious one of it being untrue, is that it does not make the legal problem go away. It actually makes it worse. Because every time Trump publicly attacks a judge who is presiding over one of his cases, he is creating additional evidence of a pattern of conduct that courts can and do factor into how they handle subsequent proceedings. And I think Trump genuinely does not understand or does not care that the performance that works for his political base is actively damaging his legal position in ways that compound over time. The bigger picture that this moment fits into is one that I think should genuinely concern people regardless of where they stand politically, because what we are watching is a sustained and deliberate effort to treat the judicial branch of the American government as an obstacle to be managed rather than an institution to be respected. And courts can absorb a certain amount of that kind of treatment and keep functioning, but there are limits. And when a judge threatens to jail lawyers for lying about evidence, those limits are being tested in real time in public. And the question of whether the judicial system can hold its authority against a defendant and a legal team that have shown they are willing to push right up to those limits and sometimes past them is not just a question about one case or one set of lawyers, but is a question about whether the rule of law in this country still means what we say it means. And in my honest opinion, the answer to that question depends entirely on whether judges like this one keep doing exactly what this judge did, which is making clear that no client is powerful enough and no political relationship is strong enough to put anyone above the authority of the court. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Do Trump's lawyers actually end up in jail, or does the threat alone change their behavior enough to avoid that outcome? Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell because we are covering every development as it comes. See you in the next one. Stay safe.